The spoon quivered slightly, as Unaritzia Karl Hoffmann raised it to his lips, tasting fresh milk for the first time in 2 years. Real milk, unlike the powdered substitute that had become standard in the Afrika Korps since 1941. The sweet cream coating his tongue contradicted everything the Wehrmacht had told him about American resources. In his hidden journal tucked beneath his mattress, he wrote words that would have earned him harsh punishment from Nazi officers. The Americans feed their prisoners better than Germany feeds its own soldiers. June 4, 1943, Mexia, Texas. Through the mess hall windows at the newly opened camp, 4 miles west of town, he could see American guards casually eating sandwiches piled thick with meat. In the Afrika Korps, his unit had survived on 300 grams of canned meat and 125 grams of hard bread as their daily ration, supplemented, when fortune allowed, by captured British supplies. Yet here, in a nation Nazi propaganda had dismissed as weakened by Jewish influence and democratic softness, food seemed limitless. That morning, 1850, veterans of Field Marshal Irwin, Rommel's famed Afrika Korps filed into the mess hall. Not a field kitchen with its 2-horse goulash canon wagon serving watery soup, not the sand-contaminated rations of North Africa, but a fully equipped dining facility with electric refrigerators, steam tables, and industrial dishwashers. Every 5 barracks shared a mess hall with cooks, waiters, silverware, and by all accounts excellent meals. The entire town of Mexia had gathered to witness the enemy soldiers' arrival, watching the tanned, healthy captives march down Railroad Street. None of them knew that this breakfast would ignite one of the most profound psychological shocks in modern prisoner of war history. The systematic dismantling of Nazi racial ideology, brought about by the simple act of eating. The proof of American agricultural power was not delivered in propaganda, leaflets, but on metal trays heaped with eggs, bacon, white bread, butter, jam, and real coffee. The German worldview would crumble not solely through military defeat, but through daily encounters with an abundance they had been taught was impossible. The road to this moment began on May 13, 1943. In Tunisia, General Jürgen von Arnim, who had replaced the recalled Desert Fox, surrendered along with some 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The Afrika Korps, who had once driven the British back to the gates of Cairo and earned even Montgomery's grudging respect, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Obergefreiter Franz Müller, holder of the Iron Cross Second Class, veteran of the Poland and France campaigns, and survivor of 2 harsh years in the North African desert. His account, discovered decades later in the National Archives, provides historians with the most detailed description of the Germans' food shock in American captivity. We had been living on 750 grams of bread, 150 grams of fat, and 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish daily when supplies reached us. Müller wrote, "More often we survived on dates, captured rations, or nothing at all. The journey from defeat to revelation began in the collection cages at Tunis, and Müller and 30,000 other prisoners waited in makeshift camps for transport. American logistics were already unraveling their assumptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of POWs, daily with organizational precision that surpassed anything the Wehrmacht had achieved, even at its peak. But it was the food that delivered the first blow. Feldwebel Hans Kleene, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, wrote to his wife 6 months later from Camp E. McCain in Mississippi, "In the cages at Tunis, while we waited for ships, the Americans gave us white bread with our meals." White bread. In Africa, we ate knekkebrot, a hard whole wheat cracker, when we were lucky. The American guards consumed more bread at each meal than my squad saw in a week. The Liberty ships that ferried them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American production, built at a rate of 3 per day at peak output. These vessels, returning empty from supply runs to Europe, were repurposed to carry as many as 30,000 prisoners per month, instead of the cattle cars they had expected. The Germans found themselves in holds modified for human transport, complete with ventilation, lighting, and proper sanitation. The Atlantic crossing, in July 1943, marked the second stage of culinary shock. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker of the 21st Panzer Division kept a food diary, preserved in letters sent home after his release breakfast: oatmeal with sugar and milk, white bread with butter, coffee with cream, He recorded on July 15th. This was food for officers in Germany, not for common soldiers. Yet here even we prisoners received it. The meals aboard ship astonished the Germans. They saw American merchant sailors eating steak, eggs, fresh vegetables, and ice cream. Ice cream, a luxury in Germany reserved for high-ranking party officials. The ship's refuse bins contained more calories than entire German units received in a day. Lieutenant Heinrich Weber, from a Prussian military family with service dating back to Frederick the Great, later wrote in unpublished memoirs, "As our ship neared the American coast, I watched sailors throw away barely touched meals, whole dinners overboard. I thought of my men in Africa, grateful for a handful of dates and brackish water, and I began to realize that we had been fighting not merely an army, but an entire civilization beyond our comprehension." August 2nd, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first meal on American soil shattered the last fragments of Nazi propaganda about American weakness. Upon arrival, the comfort of the Pullman cars transporting them to prison camps amazed the Germans, as did the vastness of the country and its untouched prosperity. But nothing prepared them for the abundance waiting at the processing station. They were served fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, cornbread, apple pie, and coffee sweetened with real sugar. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, a baker's son from Munich, noted in his diary that this single meal contained more meat than his family's monthly ration back in Germany. The Americans apologized that the meal was simple because we had arrived unexpectedly, Fischer wrote. Apologized for food that German generals would have considered a feast. That moment revealed the depth of our delusion. The train journey from Norfolk to camps in Texas and Oklahoma proved more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled through Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, prisoners pressed their faces against the windows, witnessing an America that Nazi doctrine had insisted could not exist. At every stop, they saw railroad workers eating meat sandwiches, drinking Coca-Cola, and smoking cigarettes without the slightest concern for rationing. In Memphis, Tennessee, they watched as a dining car was loaded with provisions, sides of beef, crates of eggs, sacks of potatoes, boxes of fresh vegetables. The supplies for one train exceeded what entire German divisions had received in a month in North Africa. Stabsgefreiter Rudolf Richter, an agricultural inspector from Westphalia before his conscription, documented the scene. The amount of food transported daily on American railways could feed all of Germany. I saw freight cars filled with wheat, refrigerated cars full of meat and milk, entire trains devoted solely to moving food from farms to cities, with no guards, no special protection. Food moved as steadily as flowing rivers. September 19, 1943. Camp Hearne, Texas. Arrival at the permanent camps delivered the next level of psychological demolition through food. The United States sought to make life as tolerable as possible for POWs for two reasons: to ensure reciprocal treatment of American prisoners and to win the goodwill of Germans, who would one day help rebuild Europe. The mess hall surpassed anything most German soldiers had known, even before the war. Electric refrigerators hummed constantly. Industrial dishwashers cleaned thousands of plates. Steam tables kept food hot for hours, and massive mixers kneaded dough for fresh bread daily. By the Geneva Convention, POWs were entitled to food, clothing, and medical care equal to that of their captors. At Camp Swift, Texas, Unteritzia Karl Hoffman was assigned to kitchen duty. What he saw there haunted him for decades. Today we disposed of 300 pounds of food, he wrote on September 23rd. Not spoiled food, but simply surplus from overcooking. American regulations require preparing 10% more than necessary to guarantee every prisoner a full portion. The extra is discarded. The posted ration scale read like fantasy. 3/4 of a pound of meat per day, 1 pound of potatoes, 1/2 pound of vegetables, 3/4 of a pound of bread, plus sugar, coffee, milk, butter, and eggs. The cost of feeding prisoners was managed carefully, with farmers employing POW laborers paying 45 cents per hour per man to help offset the millions spent on the program. Feldwebel Hans Kleen, now at Camp McCain in Mississippi, described the meals. For breakfast, we receive oatmeal or cornflakes with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, coffee with cream. For lunch, always meat with vegetables, potatoes or rice, bread, and dessert. For dinner, more meat, more vegetables, soup, bread, and coffee. On Sundays, we are served chicken or turkey with all the traditional accompaniments. The prisoners soon realized that American military rations far exceeded what German civilians had received even before the war. German civilian rations had dropped to 2,178 calories in 1942, 43 and to 1981 calories in 1943-44, while German POWs in American camps were consuming more than 3,000 calories daily. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, where the highest-ranking German officers, including 25 generals, were housed, the situation was even more extraordinary. General von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, lived in a house, furnished with a car and driver. The generals had personal cooks and could request special meals. They dined on steaks, roasted chicken, fresh fish, and vegetables unavailable to German civilians since 1940. Even the enlisted men's rations astonished the prisoners. Obergefreiter Franz Müller wrote from Camp Shelby, "Today for lunch we had fried catfish fresh from the Mississippi rivers. With it came coleslaw, hush puppies, fried cornbread, green beans, and peach cobbler for dessert. The Negro soldiers who serve us eat the same food. In Germany, we were told Americans starved their Negro population." Another propaganda fabrication exposed. October 1943. By autumn, German POWs were working on American farms, and what they witnessed there completed the destruction of Nazi agricultural myths. From 1943, when prisoners began arriving in large numbers, until the end of the war in 1945, POWs in Texas picked peaches and citrus fruit, harvested rice, cut timber, baled hay, threshed grain, and gathered pecans. At a dairy farm outside Huntsville, Texas, Unteroffizier Ernst Wagner watched in disbelief as the farmer dumped hundreds of gallons of milk. Because the processing plant could not handle the surplus, he poured it onto the ground without hesitation. Wagner wrote, "Milk that German. Mothers would have begged for their children was used to irrigate fields." When I protested, the farmer explained that there was simply too much production. If it all reached the market, prices would collapse. Roughly 12,000 POWs were held in Nebraska, working across the road from farms, stacking hay and harvesting sugar beets. Gefreiter Paul Schmidt, assigned to a corn farm, noted, "The farmer's chickens eat grain without restriction. The cats drink fresh milk daily. The dogs are given meat scraps that would sustain a German family for days." Many American farmers who hired POW labor invited them into their homes for meals, which was allowed as long as guards were present. These farm kitchen meals delivered perhaps the most devastating psychological shock of all. Farmers laid out overwhelming spreads, platters of fried chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes dripping with butter, green beans cooked with ham, corn on the cob, biscuits with gravy, multiple varieties of pie, pitchers of cold milk, and endless coffee. Christmas 1943. At Camp Hearne, Texas, the holiday meal dealt a psychological blow from which many never recovered. The menu read like a dream: roast turkey with stuffing, honey-glazed ham, mashed potatoes with giblet gravy, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, fresh rolls with butter, mince pie, pumpkin pie, apple pie with ice cream, coffee, milk, and apple cider. Feldwebel Hans Kleiner wrote from Camp McCain, "We ate until we were sick. Not from bad food, but from the overwhelming quantity. Our stomachs, trained by years of deprivation, could not handle it." Men wept while eating, thinking of their hungry families at home. The contrast with German rations was stark. German POWs held by Germany itself received 9 pounds of potatoes per week, along with 5 pounds of bread and 2.5 pounds of cabbage, supplemented by small amounts of margarine and ersatz coffee made from acorns. Meanwhile, German prisoners in the U.S. were enjoying nutrition, levels unknown since peacetime. March 1944. With spring came an even greater bounty. Fresh vegetables appeared daily: lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, radishes, carrots, celery. Fruits that had been unimaginable luxuries in Germany filled the tables. Oranges, grapefruit, bananas, strawberries in season. The variety alone stunned men accustomed to monotonous military rations. Camp bakeries produced fresh bread daily, white, whole wheat, rye, whatever the bakers chose. POWs assigned to these bakeries reported using more flour in one day than German bakeries received in a month. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, the baker's son, worked at the Camp Swift bakery. "We bake 500 loaves daily for our compound alone. We make pastries, cakes, cookies for special occasions. The sugar we use for a single day's desserts would have supplied a German bakery for months. Summer 1944. The Normandy invasion brought word that Germany was now fighting on 3 fronts. Yet the food situation in American POW camps remained unchanged. If anything, it improved as more prisoners were sent to farms and saw firsthand the scale of American production. In Nebraska, men working the sugar beet fields discovered that a single county produced more than several German provinces combined. At a canning factory in Arkansas, POWs saw tons of perfectly edible peaches rejected for minor blemishes. At Fort Lewis, Washington, another group of Germans had similar revelations. Among them was 18-year-old G.A. Gras, captured in Normandy and sent to the U.S. in August 1944. Standing in front of the camp canteen, deciding between ice cream or Coca-Cola, he later wrote, "The last time I had ice cream in Germany was years ago, and I had never even tasted Coca-Cola. I decided to take both. In that moment I realized how lucky I was to have been captured by the Americans and not the Russians." September 1944. After more than a year in captivity, many POWs had gained 20 to 30 pounds. Medical examinations showed improvement in every health marker: better teeth from regular milk consumption, stronger bones from adequate protein, clearer skin from vitamins in fresh fruits and vegetables. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a German medical officer imprisoned at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, documented the transformation. The men who arrived malnourished, many suffering from scurvy, pellagra, and other deficiencies, are healthier now than they have ever been. Their physical recovery is extraordinary, but the psychological impact went even deeper. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker wrote, "We no longer speak of German victory. How can we defeat a nation that feeds its prisoners abundantly while waging war on multiple fronts? Their resources reveal an advantage we cannot overcome." December 1944. As Germany launched its last major offensive in American POW camps, Christmas dinner of 1944 surpassed even the previous year's feast. Turkey, ham, roast beef, and all the traditional side dishes were served, along with special holiday treats: fruitcakes shipped from bakeries across the U.S., candy canes, chocolate, real chocolate, not the ersatz variety made from turnips that had become common in Germany, nuts, and fresh fruit. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, Italian POWs who had switched sides after Italy's surrender were even allowed to prepare special pasta dishes for the holiday. German prisoners watched as their former allies, now cooperating with Americans, cooked with ingredients long vanished from German kitchens: olive oil, real cheese, fine white flour. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war was over, yet the food revelations continued. German prisoners learned that throughout the conflict, American civilians had never endured real hunger. Meat, sugar, and coffee had been rationed, but no American had faced starvation. U.S. agriculture had been so vast, so secure that war scarcely touched its reserves. In May 1945, the office of the Provost Marshal General finally restricted food in POW camps and ended canteen sales, largely because American civilians complained that prisoners were eating too well. Yet even with reduced portions, German POWs still received more food than civilians, and Germany would see for years after the war. The statistics told the story clearly. German prisoners in America consumed an average of 3,200 calories per day. German soldiers in combat were supposed to receive 3,600 calories daily, but in reality, supplies rarely met that standard. By 1945, German civilians survived on less than 1,412 calories per day. American camps provided about 3/4 of a pound of meat per prisoner per day, while the German military ration often included only 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish when available. The contrast between American abundance and German scarcity became the most powerful argument against Nazi ideology, not through speeches or propaganda, but through daily lived experience. Summer 1945. As German POWs prepared for repatriation, many begged to stay in America. They had seen an agricultural system that transformed their understanding of what was possible. Hans Wacker, a prisoner at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, later remembered life in the camps was an improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. Our treatment was excellent. The re-education program worked best not in classrooms but at the dining tables. Each meal contradicted Nazi teachings about American weakness. Every satisfied appetite weakened our belief in racial superiority and the supposed inefficiency of democracy. Dr. Walter Schreiber, a former Wehrmacht colonel and agricultural economist, later calculated, the food America gave to German prisoners could have sustained the entire Sixth Army at Stalingrad. Their agricultural surplus could have fed all of occupied Europe. We never understood we were fighting a nation that had solved humanity's oldest problem, how to feed everyone. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683, German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a homeland that was divided, devastated, and starving, but they carried with them invaluable lessons. They had seen that prosperity was possible, that a society could nourish all its citizens, that democracy could create abundance rather than chaos. Many former POWs became leaders in West Germany's post-war agricultural transformation. Hans Müller, once imprisoned at Camp Shelby, introduced American farming methods to Bavaria, raising crop yields by 40% within 5 years. Wilhelm Fischer from Camp McCain helped build food distribution systems modeled on American logistics. Friedrich Bauer advocated for national nutrition standards based on what he had observed in U.S. camps. After the war, about 5,000 former German POWs immigrated permanently to the United States, and thousands more would have come if allowed. They sought not only opportunity, but the food security they had first encountered as captives. October 1947, Fort Lewis, Washington. Among the last POWs to be repatriated was G.A. Gras, who had spent 3 years in captivity. Decades later, he returned as a successful businessman, but he never forgot the moment he first stood in front of the camp canteen, choosing between ice cream and Coca-Cola, luxuries his family in Germany could only dream about. We were always treated fairly, given sufficient food, and paid 80 cents a day that allowed us to buy cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream, and Coca-Cola, he wrote 73 years later. These were things my mother and sister in Germany could only imagine. 1985, Austin, Texas. At the 40th anniversary reunion of German POWs, more than 500 former prisoners returned to America, many with their families, to show them where their transformation had begun. Former Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann, now 78 and an American citizen since 1955, delivered a speech that distilled their experience. We came to America as soldiers of the Third Reich, convinced of our racial superiority, certain that democracy was weak. We left as witnesses to a deeper truth. America's strength came from its agricultural productivity, not racial purity. Every meal we ate in the prison camps challenged our beliefs. The Americans fed us, their enemies, better than Hitler ever fed us, his soldiers. They had such surplus that waste was routine. This was not meant as mockery. It was simply reality. We learned that a nation capable of feeding its enemies without strain had achieved true victory. A society with such resources had defeated scarcity itself. We returned to Germany knowing our entire worldview had been a deception. America had prevailed through agricultural power and industrial might. We who had marched as conquerors were transformed by abundance beyond imagination. To America, from your former enemies, thank you for showing us that true strength lies in creation, not destruction. You fed us when we would have starved you. That generosity and that victory defined genuine power. The auditorium erupted in sustained applause. Americans and Germans together, former enemies united by the recognition of a transformation that had begun with a simple meal in June 1943. The story of German POWs and American food reveals how profound change can come not from argument but from lived experience. German soldiers who witnessed the scale of American agricultural abundance became living proof of democracy's practical success. Their transformation began not with political instruction, but with daily meals. Not through propaganda, but through tangible reality. Each serving of food undermined Nazi ideology more effectively than any formal re-education program ever could. The change was so deep that when former POW G.A. Gray returned to Fort Lewis in 2017 at the age of 91, he rode a bicycle across the base carrying signs that read, USA, the country and its people. You are my first and final love. He recalled, It was in August 1944, when I first came here as a prisoner of war. We were always treated fairly, given enough food and paid 80 cents a day. That allowed us to buy cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream, and Coca-Cola, things my mother and sister in Germany could only dream of. That's why, 73 years later, I have come back to say thank you, America. I will never forget Colonel William Purcell, Deputy Garrison Commander of Joint Base Lewis McChord, greeted him with these words: "You remind us that how we treat others defines who we are. There are moments even today when we may be tempted to forget that. You show us that this is a lesson that must never be forgotten." The German POWs encountered American agricultural might firsthand, and it reshaped them. They had arrived as enemies, but departed as witnesses, and many later returned as immigrants and allies. Their children grew up in a democratic Germany aligned with the United States, a partnership born from generosity rather than vengeance. The camps themselves left little physical trace. Most were dismantled after the war, their buildings sold off or demolished, their land returned to farming or other uses. Yet their impact endured, in the memories of those who had lived through them, and in the democratic reconstruction of Germany that followed. The Marshall Plan, which later fed and rebuilt Europe, simply extended the lesson, first learned in POW camps, that generosity and victory fosters lasting peace. Former prisoners who went on to succeed in post-war Germany often credited their American camp experience as transformative. They had witnessed prosperity built through cooperation rather than conquest. They had seen people of different races working together productively. They had discovered that democratic systems could generate abundance rather than chaos. These lessons, absorbed daily at the dining table, proved more powerful than any ideological lectures. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the foremost historian of German POWs in America, concluded, "America won the propaganda war not with clever slogans, but through undeniable reality. Every meal, every electric light, every working toilet stood as an argument against Nazism. The POWs were persuaded by the prosperity they could see, touch, and taste. The numbers alone tell part of the story. Yes, 371,683 German prisoners were held in America. Yes, they contributed 14 million man-days of agricultural labor. Yes, fewer than 1% attempted escape. But the real story was one of human transformation, achieved through the simple act of being well-fed and treated with dignity. When historians explain West Germany's democratic success, they often cite the Marshall Plan, denazification, or the Soviet threat. Too often they overlook the 370,000 German soldiers who returned home carrying direct memories of American democracy in practice, fair treatment, food shared even with enemies, and a system that worked better than anything they had known. These men became unintentional ambassadors of democracy, influencing families, communities, and future leaders. They had lived inside the supposed enemy system and found it superior in every way. By the time the last German prisoner left American soil in 1946, they had left behind a remarkable record. The lowest escape rate of any large POW population, the highest level of voluntary cooperation with camp authorities, and the most successful transformation of enemy combatants into future allies. All of this was achieved not through cruelty or relentless propaganda, but through basic humanity and food in abundance. The investment America made in feeding its prisoners, through both agricultural resources and logistical effort, paid immeasurable dividends. Hundreds of thousands of Germans had experienced democracy firsthand. They had learned that American power stemmed not from racial ideology but from productive capacity. They had seen Nazi propaganda for the hollow deception it was. In the end, the German POW experience in America proved a timeless truth. Real power lies in the ability to create and to share abundance. The fact that America could feed its enemies better than Germany could feed its own soldiers exposed the fatal weakness of the Nazi system. The POWs had arrived expecting to see American weakness and division. Instead, they discovered a nation of almost unlimited agricultural and industrial strength, combined with surprising humanity. They came as captives, but left as witnesses to democracy's achievement. In their transformation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and a rebuilt, democratic Germany. Their grandchildren would grow up in a prosperous nation, part of NATO and the European Union, allied with the United States. And it all traced back to that moment in June 1943, when hungry Afrika Korps soldiers were served their first American meal and realized their entire worldview had been built on lies. Food had shaped the war's outcome as decisively as weapons. Meals had won hearts as surely as battles. In that victory lay the foundation for enduring peace, not forged through threats, but through the promise of shared prosperity. The German POWs had been astonished to find American prison, food superior to Wehrmacht rations. But in that astonishment came transformation. And in that transformation lay hope, that former enemies could become friends, and that democracy could triumph not by destroying, but by feeding even those who once came as destroyers.